There are children in this world who stop speaking, not because they have nothing to say, but because the weight of what they've lost has made every word feel pointless. 7-year-old Ava Caldwell was one of them. For 3 months, she sat in silence while the world's most expensive specialists tried to reach her and failed. Her mother had spent millions searching for someone who could bring her daughter back. Nobody could. Nobody, that is, until a janitor pushing a maintenance cart rolled quietly past her door and stopped. If stories like this one remind you that the most important people in our lives are rarely the ones with the loudest titles, subscribe to this channel right now, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me the city and country where you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now settle in, because what happened inside Caldwell Tower is something nobody saw coming. The elevator was broken again on the 42nd floor. That was the first thing Mason Reed noted when he clocked in at 7:14 on a Tuesday morning, pulling his maintenance cart off the service elevator and listening to the familiar clunk and wheeze of a building that had more zeros in its value than years in its age. Caldwell Tower was 47 stories of glass and polished steel rising above the Harbor District, a building that appeared in architecture magazines and featured in the kind of corporate profiles that used words like visionary and transformative without irony. The lobby downstairs had heated marble floors. The executive suites had views that cost more per square foot than most people's homes. The elevator on 42 had a stuck relay and had been sticking for 3 weeks. Mason had submitted 2 work orders. Both had been approved by facilities management and then quietly ignored by whoever was supposed to approve the parts requisition above that. He pulled a folded slip of paper from his shirt pocket, added a third notation, and tucked it back. That was how Mason worked. Quietly, methodically, without making a scene about things that would eventually get resolved whether he made noise or not. He was 37 years old, broad across the shoulders in a way that his dark green maintenance uniform did nothing to disguise, with close-cropped hair going slightly gray at the temples and a jaw that always looked like it needed another day's shaving. His hands were rough. There was a scar along his left forearm, pale and slightly raised, that he never explained to anyone. When people in the building noticed him at all, which was infrequently, they noticed the scar first, then looked away. That was fine with Mason. He preferred it. He had started at Caldwell Tower 8 months earlier, applying through a facilities management contractor without listing any previous employment beyond a single line. U.S. military, retired. The HR coordinator who processed his paperwork had been 24 years old and had not asked follow-up questions. The position paid $19 an hour plus benefits, which included health insurance, and health insurance was the reason Mason had taken it. His daughter Lily was 9 years old and had the kind of energy that occasionally resulted in minor orthopedic incidents, and Mason had learned to stop taking risks with things that couldn't be undone. He made his first pass down the 42nd floor corridor at 7:20, checking the supply closet inventory, replacing 2 burned-out overhead panels in the east hallway, and logging a water stain on the ceiling tiles outside Conference Room D that suggested a slow leak somewhere in the floor above. The floor was mostly empty at this hour. Administrative support staff didn't arrive until 8:30, and the executives who occupied the corner suites kept hours that were either very early or very late, depending on which time zone they were currently managing. The only person Mason encountered on his first sweep was a young woman he didn't recognize, sitting on the floor in the corridor outside a glass-walled conference room, her back against the wall and her knees pulled up to her chest. She was maybe 7 years old, maybe 8. Small either way, with dark hair that someone had attempted to put into a neat braid that had come mostly undone. She was wearing a blue dress that was slightly too formal for a Tuesday morning, and she was holding a piece of paper folded into the rough shape of a boat, the kind made from a torn sheet of printer paper by someone who knew the folds but hadn't been careful about the creases. She wasn't crying. She wasn't doing anything, actually, just sitting there on the floor outside the conference room with her paper boat, staring at nothing in particular, while the corridor was otherwise empty. Mason stopped his cart about 10 feet away. He didn't approach. He didn't say anything immediately. He just stopped. The way you stop when you've moved through enough situations where sudden movement is the wrong choice. The girl didn't look at him. He looked at the paper boat. Then he looked at the folded edges, which were uneven. The person who'd folded it had been working fast, or working from memory, or working while thinking about something else entirely. "Hull's going to take on water," he said. The girl looked up then. She had dark eyes, and the expression in them was the kind that didn't belong on a 7-year-old's face. Not sadness exactly, but something flatter than sadness. Something that had been sad for long enough that it had worn smooth. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked back at the boat. Mason moved his cart past her, about 2 feet, then crouched down to examine a scuff mark on the baseboard. He wasn't particularly concerned about the scuff mark, but crouching put him at roughly her eye level, and doing something with his hands made the space between them less formal. "The fold on the bow," he said, not looking at her. "If it's not tight, the whole front opens up when it hits water, folds right apart." "Nothing." He buffed the baseboard. "Not that it's not a good boat," he added. "Folds are hard to get right." He stood, picked up his cart handle, and continued down the corridor. He did not look back. Her name was Ava Caldwell, and he learned this not from the girl herself, but from the facility's supervisor, Dennis, who flagged him during afternoon rounds with the expression of a man delivering information he hadn't been asked to manage and didn't particularly want to. "The kid you walked past this morning," Dennis said. "On 42. "I know who she is," Mason said. "You talked to her." "I said 4 words about a paper boat." Dennis rubbed the back of his neck. "Her mother has cameras up on that floor. Not the regular security cameras, personal ones, in the hallway outside the conference room. The girl sits there sometimes when Caldwell has morning meetings. They've had... Look, there's been some situation with the therapist, the kid won't talk to anyone, and apparently Caldwell saw you in the boat thing, and she's asking who you are." Mason looked at him. "I'm telling you because I need this not to become a thing," Dennis said. "Just, if you're going to be on that floor, don't engage with the kid. Don't make it complicated. Her mother is..." He stopped, seemed to reconsider what he was about to say. "She owns the building." "I know who owns the building," Mason said. "Right. So just keep it professional." "Dennis," Mason said, "I buffed a baseboard. That is literally the most professional thing I know how to do." Dennis left. Mason noted the scuff mark on the 43rd floor supply closet door and put in a maintenance request. He'd heard about Sienna Caldwell the way everyone in the building had heard about her, in pieces, through the particular kind of ambient information that circulates through any large building among the people who clean and repair and maintain it, invisible and attentive. The version that reached Mason's level was stripped of the corporate profile language and correspondingly more accurate. She was 30 years old. She'd built Caldwell Biotech into a global company before she was 26, which was the kind of achievement that attracted a specific kind of attention and also a specific kind of resentment. Her husband, a man named Daniel, an aerospace engineer she'd met at a conference, had died in a small plane crash 14 months ago, coming back from a long weekend away. The crash had been weather-related. Nobody's fault. The plane had gone down over a mountain range in the early morning, and by the time search and rescue found it, there was nothing to find. He had been 33. Their daughter Ava had been 6 at the time. The months since had been, by all available evidence, a study in what happened when someone with sufficient resources applied those resources systematically to a problem that didn't respond to resources. Sienna Caldwell had hired grief counselors. She'd hired child psychologists and play therapists and 2 different specialists who apparently had written books on pediatric loss that Mason had never heard of. She'd converted a room in the Caldwell Tower executive suite into a dedicated space for Ava's therapy sessions, which meant Ava could be near her mother while the specialists worked. None of it had worked. Ava hadn't spoken in a meaningful way to a specialist in over 2 months. She sat. She endured sessions. She accepted snacks, occasionally. She folded paper into shapes that were almost but not quite things. Boats that weren't quite boats. Birds that weren't quite birds. She waited for sessions to end. Mason had pulled his cart past her in the hallway and said 4 words about a paper boat, and apparently that was enough to get him flagged on a personal security camera. He thought about that during his drive home that evening, sitting in his truck in the school pickup line waiting for Lily, watching the doors of Franklin Elementary, the way he watched everything, with the particular quality of attention that had once been a professional tool and now was simply the way his mind worked, whether he wanted it to or not. Lily came out third in her class group, backpack hanging off one shoulder, talking without pause to the girl beside her. She spotted his truck and broke off mid-sentence, jogging over. "You're early," she said, climbing in. By 2 minutes. Still counts. She dropped her backpack in the footwell. Can we get the good rice for dinner? Not the packet kind. The packet kind takes 8 minutes. The good kind tastes better. That's a philosophical position, not a cooking instruction. Lily looked at him. That means yes, right? Yeah, he said. That means yes. He pulled out of the school lot and drove toward home, listening to Lily describe a disagreement between two of her classmates with the narrative investment of someone recounting a geopolitical crisis. And he thought about a little girl sitting on a hallway floor with a paper boat that would fall apart on water, staring at nothing, waiting for something he suspected she couldn't have named if someone had asked. He knew what that felt like. Not as a concept, as a physical condition. He'd felt it in a hospital waiting room 6 years ago, sitting in a plastic chair at 2 in the morning while Lily slept across 2 pushed-together seats with her head on his jacket, and a doctor had come out and said the words that ended one part of his life and began whatever came after. Claire had been 31. The cancer had been the aggressive kind, the kind that moved faster than anyone had prepared them for, and Mason had been 4,000 miles away when the diagnosis came back. On a deployment he could not discuss and could not leave without consequences that extended beyond himself. He'd come home. He'd come home as fast as the system would let him, which was not fast enough. 6 years of raising Lily alone had not erased that. It had put it somewhere he could carry. There was a difference. He suspected Ava Caldwell hadn't found that difference yet. The next morning he was back on 42 at 7:20. She was there again. Same spot, different paper. This one shaped into something that might have been an attempt at an airplane, though the wings were uneven and one side drooped lower than the other. Mason stopped his cart at the supply closet, which was 12 feet from where she sat. He spent 4 minutes actually restocking the supply closet, which needed it. When he came out, he crouched against the opposite wall, not next to her, not crowding the space, just down at floor level, and set about logging his inventory on his clipboard. The girl watched him for a moment. Then she looked at her paper airplane. Weight's off, he said to his clipboard. Left wing's heavier. You'd need to fold the right side out a little more to balance it. She didn't say anything. He finished his inventory, stood, and moved his cart to the next section. On his way back past, 20 minutes later, the paper airplane was on the floor beside her, and its right wing had been carefully, imperfectly adjusted. Well, Sienna Caldwell had not slept through the night in 14 months. She'd stopped noting this around month 8, the same way she'd stopped noting the particular quality of the silence in the apartment on evenings when Ava went to bed at 7:30, and the rest of the night stretched out with the peculiar texture of time that has nowhere to be. She functioned. That was the accurate word. She ran a company with 11,000 employees across 6 countries. She sat in board meetings and made decisions and returned calls and reviewed quarterly projections. And none of it felt like anything in particular, which she understood was a symptom and not a character failure, though there were hours, usually between 2 and 4 in the morning, when it felt like exactly that. Ava was the thing she couldn't solve. She had hired the best people. She knew she had hired the best people because she'd done the same research on grief specialists that she'd applied to every other significant problem in her life, methodically and without sentiment, reading outcome studies and peer-reviewed literature and speaking to colleagues whose judgment she trusted. She had created the conditions these specialists required. She had given Ava access and space and time. Her daughter sat in sessions and came out the same as she went in, and the specialists would meet with Sienna afterward and talk about processing timelines and readiness windows in language that was professionally careful and clinically useless. And Sienna would nod and schedule the next session and go back to her desk and put her face in her hands for approximately 90 seconds before her assistant knocked. She had a security feed on the 42nd floor hallway because Ava had begun, 3 weeks ago, wandering out of the executive suite during Sienna's morning meetings and sitting in the corridor. The building psychologist, a different specialist, one Sienna had retained for staff support, had suggested this was a kind of autonomy-seeking behavior, a way of existing in a space that felt like neither the clinical therapy environment nor the complicated emotional geography of home, and Sienna should allow it within safe parameters. Safe parameters meant cameras. She had not expected to spend 20 minutes on a Tuesday morning rewatching footage of a maintenance worker crouch against a corridor wall and say something to Ava about a paper airplane's weight distribution. She had rewatched it 4 times. It wasn't what he said. It was what he didn't do. He hadn't approached her. He hadn't sat beside her uninvited. He hadn't deployed the particular careful warmth that every specialist had been trained to produce on demand. The warmth that Ava had apparently developed the ability to detect and reject within approximately 3 minutes of any session starting. He'd talked to a clipboard about wing balance, and then he'd left. And Ava had adjusted the airplane's wing. Sienna called Dennis in facilities. "The maintenance worker on 42 this morning," she said. "I need his file." Dennis's pause lasted exactly long enough for her to understand that he was calculating the relative weights of employee privacy protocol and the name on the deed to the building. "I'll have HR pull his personnel file and send it up," he said. "Thank you, Dennis." The file arrived within 30 minutes. It was thin, the way contractor files often were. Work history form, background check clearance, emergency contact. The employment history section listed his military service without detail, followed by an 18-month gap that wasn't explained, followed by a series of short-term facilities and maintenance positions. Sienna read it twice. Then she set it down on her desk and looked out the window at the harbor. The gap in the employment history didn't concern her. Lots of things concerned her. The gap wasn't one of them. What concerned her, what had been concerning her, building at the back of her mind all morning, was the thing Ava had done with the airplane wing. It was such a small thing, a minor adjustment to a folded piece of paper. And yet in 14 months of the best therapeutic intervention money could purchase, Sienna could not remember the last time her daughter had done something just because someone made an offhand observation that happened to be true. She looked at her schedule. She had a pharmaceutical partnership call in 12 minutes, a board pre-read to finish, and a dinner in the evening that she'd been planning to cancel. She picked up the personnel file again. Mason Reed, she read. Age 37. Emergency contact, Lily Reed, daughter. Age 9. She set it down. Outside her window, 42 floors below, the harbor was gray and the morning light was doing something complicated with the surface of the water, breaking it into pieces, making it look like something other than what it was. The pharmaceutical call notification popped up on her screen. Sienna pressed the button to join the call. But she kept the personnel file open on her desk, and twice during the next hour she found herself not listening to the call, looking instead at the 2 words at the top of the page, Mason Reed. By the 3rd morning, Mason had stopped pretending he was checking the supply closet. He still restocked it. He was not the kind of man who faked work, but he stopped manufacturing elaborate reasons to be on the 42nd floor corridor at 7:20. He was there because the girl was there, and something about the way she sat on that floor bothered him in a way he hadn't been able to put down since Tuesday. Not bothered like a problem, bothered like a splinter, small, specific, not dangerous, but impossible to stop being aware of. Ava was in her spot when he rounded the corner, back against the wall, knees up. She had a fresh piece of paper today, and she was working on something with the focused, frustrated attention of a person trying to remember a thing they'd once known. Her fingers kept folding and unfolding the same corner. Whatever shape she was attempting wasn't cooperating. Mason slowed his cart without stopping it entirely. He'd learned, without articulating the lesson, that stopping cold put her on alert. Movement was less threatening. A man with a cart moving through a hallway was scenery. A man who stopped and looked was an event. He kept moving, pulled up beside the supply closet, began taking his morning count. Behind him, he heard the sound of paper being crumpled. Then silence. Then the sound of a new sheet being taken from somewhere. She was starting over. He thought about that while he counted paper towel rolls, starting over without visible frustration, just methodically discarding the failed attempt and beginning again. That was not typical 7-year-old behavior. That was the behavior of someone who had learned, at some cost, that frustration accomplished nothing. He found a small notepad in his cart's side pocket. He tore out a clean sheet, folded it in a specific sequence, 12 folds, the kind that took about 40 seconds if you knew the pattern, and set the result on the floor of the hallway without comment, then went back to his supply count. It was a crane, not a perfect one. He'd learned the fold from a Korean-American medic named Sue during a long transit wait in a location he couldn't name, and Sue had told him the traditional version had more steps, but the abbreviated version was better for situations where you didn't have much time and needed something that still looked like what it was supposed to be. He finished his count. He noted 2 items to be requisitioned. He picked up his cart handle. "How did you do the neck?" said a voice. It was so quiet he almost missed it under the sound of the cartwheels. He stopped. Ava was holding the crane. She was looking at the fold where the neck met the body, the angular joint that made the shape read as a bird rather than an abstraction. Pinch fold, he said. You push both sides in at the same time instead of folding one way. Makes a crease that goes inward instead of outward. She looked at the crane. Then she looked at her unfinished sheet of paper. I can show you, he said. Or not. Either way. She held out the unfinished paper. He sat down on the floor, not next to her, at an angle, giving her the corner, and took the sheet and showed her the pinch fold twice, slowly, then handed it back and watched her attempt it. She got it wrong the first time. He didn't reach over to fix it. He just described it again, slightly differently, and waited. The second time, she got it right. The crease went inward. She looked at it for a moment, then she went back to the fold she'd been working on before. Mason stood, picked up his cart, and went back to work. He did not make a large thing of it. He had learned, again without exactly articulating it, that the worst thing you could do in that corridor was make a large thing of anything. Oh, he found out that evening from Dennis that someone had watched the security footage again. HR wants to know if you've been interacting with the Caldwell kid, Dennis said. He had the look of a man who'd been called into an office he didn't enjoy visiting. I showed her a paper fold, Mason said. Look, it's not a complaint. From what I understand, it's more the opposite. But I need to know what's going on so I'm not caught flat-footed if Caldwell herself calls down. Nothing's going on, Mason said. She's a kid sitting in a hallway. I fold paper sometimes during rounds. That's the whole story. Dennis looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone deciding whether a simple answer was actually simple or whether its simplicity was itself the suspicious part. Okay, he said. Just keep me in the loop. Mason said he would. He drove home thinking about the pinch fold and about the way Ava had held the finished crane afterward. Not like a child showing off an accomplishment, but like someone checking whether a thing was actually real. The pattern established itself over the following 2 weeks, with the unhurried momentum of something that was going to happen regardless of whether anyone planned it. Mason did his rounds on 42. Ava was usually in the hallway by 7:30. He did not sit with her uninvited. He did not produce activities. He did what he was doing anyway: maintenance work, supply checks, the quiet mechanical problem-solving of someone responsible for the function of a building. And occasionally said something about whatever was in front of him, and occasionally she responded, and occasionally she didn't. He folded things when he had paper. A frog, which made her look up sharply because the fold made it jump when you flicked the back edge. A box that actually held a small volume of air. A fish with movable tail fins. He was not a skilled origami practitioner. His technique was rough and his folds were imprecise. But he knew a dozen shapes from different people in different places, learned during the kind of downtime that happens when you're waiting in difficult conditions, and something to do with your hands is the difference between functional and not. He told her where he'd learned each one, not as lessons, but as brief facts. The crane was from Sue. The frog was from a man named Garcia who had won $40 off Mason on a bet that he couldn't get a 7-year-old to stop crying during a community outreach event by making one jump. The fish was Mason's own invention, which meant the tail didn't always move the way it was supposed to, and he'd never quite figured out why. Ava listened. She didn't always respond, but she listened. After the first week, she started bringing her own paper. After the second week, she started attempting her own folds. Not copies of his, but her own variations, adjustments, shapes that were working towards something she had in her head that she hadn't shown him yet. Her approach was methodical and slightly obsessive, and she had a short fuse for her own mistakes that she'd immediately learned to manage, crumpling the failed attempt and starting over, quickly, like someone resetting a stopwatch. That was when Mason recognized something he hadn't let himself name before. He'd met people who processed the world this way. People who needed to make the thing with their hands before they could talk about what the thing was for. People who rebuilt engines or sharpened knives or tied and retied knots during debriefs because sitting still while talking felt like trying to read in a moving car. Possible, but nauseating. He'd been one of those people himself for a significant portion of his life. Ava wasn't refusing to communicate. She was communicating in the only channel that currently worked for her. The specialists had been talking to her like she was a radio with the volume turned down. She was a radio tuned to a different frequency. He didn't think about this in those exact terms at the time. He thought about it approximately the way he thought about most things, briefly, practically, without extensive theorizing. And then he went back to checking a dripping pipe fitting on the 42nd floor mechanical access panel. On a Thursday in the third week, she spoke to him directly for the first time about something that wasn't a paper fold. He was eating lunch in the maintenance corridor. He did this sometimes, sitting on an overturned crate near the service elevator with a sandwich from the deli 2 blocks over. When he heard the stairwell door open and small footsteps in the hall, he looked up. Ava stood at the end of the corridor about 20 feet away, wearing a yellow sweater and the expression of someone who had followed an impulse and was now uncertain about it. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Your lunch is ugly," she said. He looked at his sandwich. "It's got mustard. Mustard makes most things worse." "Why do you put it on?" "It came that way. I didn't check." She walked forward about 8 feet and stopped, examining the maintenance corridor with the careful attention of someone visiting a foreign country. The corridor was not attractive. Exposed pipes along the ceiling, fluorescent lighting, the smell of industrial cleaning fluid, and slightly warm electronics from the server room at the far end. "How come you eat here?" she said. It wasn't quite a question. "It's quiet," he said. "I like quiet." "There's a cafeteria." "There is. It has real food. It also has 11 people who want to talk to me about the relay on the 42nd elevator," he said. "I know about the relay. I've submitted 3 work orders about the relay. I don't need to discuss the relay while I'm eating." Something moved in her face. Not quite a smile. Something that was what a smile was before it became a smile. She walked over and sat on the floor. Not on a crate, on the actual floor, approximately 4 feet from his crate, and took from the pocket of her sweater a small, carefully folded piece of paper. She set it on the ground between them. It was a boat. A proper one, with the bow fold tight and the hull creased correctly, the whole shape holding its geometry the way it was supposed to. The first boat he'd ever seen her with, weeks ago, had been shapeless. This one would actually float. He looked at it. "Hull's good," he said. "I practiced," she said. "How many?" "A lot." She picked it up and looked at the bow. 17. He ate the rest of his sandwich. Ava sat on the floor and looked at her boat. "My dad made boats," she said. She said it to the boat, not to him. "Not paper, real ones, little ones, out of wood. He had tools in the garage." Mason didn't say anything. He waited. "He was going to teach me," she said. "When I was bigger." "What kind of boats?" "Sailboats." She turned the paper boat over in her hands. "He had a book about it, with pictures. It's still in the garage." The fluorescent light above them hummed. Somewhere in the building's infrastructure, something cycled on with a low mechanical vibration that moved through the floor and disappeared. "The book's not going anywhere," Mason said. Ava looked up at him. He met her eyes, then looked back at his lunch bag, folding it closed. "Books wait pretty well," he said. "Better than most things." She looked back at her boat. She didn't say anything else, but the quality of her silence changed, from the dense, load-bearing silence of the previous weeks to something lighter, something that had let a little air in. After a while, she stood up and put the boat in her sweater pocket. "Your sandwich still looks bad," she said. "It tasted worse." She almost smiled again, and then she turned and walked back down the corridor toward the stairwell. And Mason watched her go and then sat for a while in the quiet of the maintenance hall, listening to the building breathe around him. What Sienna Caldwell was watching on the security footage was making her feel things she had not expected to feel, which was irritating in the specific way that only unexpected things could be. She had reviewed the footage every morning for the past 2 weeks. She had told herself this was responsible parental oversight. She was aware that this was not entirely accurate, but it was a workable justification, and she was too busy to interrogate it more closely. What she watched, a maintenance worker doing his job, with a small girl nearby, and occasionally a paper fold, and very rarely a few words, and no apparent strategy or warmth deployment or therapeutic framework of any kind. The footage had no audio, which meant she was reading body language and spatial relationships, which she was reasonably good at in professional contexts and less practiced at in personal ones. What she read? The worker kept his distance. He never crowded Ava. He never produced the body posture of an adult trying to connect with a child. The forward lean, the exaggerated eye contact, the performative patience. He just existed in the same space, doing something with his hands, and let Ava do whatever she was going to do. And Ava, over the course of 2 weeks, had started doing more. That Thursday, Sienna's assistant knocked and said that Dr. Priya Mehta was on the line. Dr. Mehta was the play therapist she'd retained most recently, whose last 3 sessions with Ava had produced no observable progress. And Sienna looked at her phone and then at the security feed showing the maintenance corridor, which currently showed nothing because Ava had gone back upstairs and Mason Reed had gone back to his rounds, and she told her assistant to let Dr. Mehta know she'd need to reschedule. Her assistant's pause was the specific pause of a person who had now rescheduled this same call twice and was deciding whether to say so. "I'll move it to next week," Sienna said. "Thank you." That evening, for the first time in 3 months, Ava came to dinner without being asked twice. She ate most of her food. She didn't talk much, but she answered questions with more than single-word responses, which had been the primary register of the past several months. When Sienna asked carefully how her day had been, Ava said okay, and then added after a moment, "I've been practicing boats." Sienna looked at her. "Paper boats," Ava said, somewhat defensively, as if she suspected this was going to become an adult thing. "That sounds good," Sienna said. She kept her voice even. "Are they getting better?" "The 17th one was good," Ava said. "The others were mostly bad." 17 tries, Sienna said. "That's a lot of practice." Ava shrugged. "You have to practice." Sienna didn't push it further. She had learned, late, imperfectly, that pushing Ava produced exactly the effect of pushing a bruise, a sharp withdrawal, a closing off that took days to ease. She passed the breadbasket. She talked about something unrelated. Ava ate her dinner. After Ava went to bed, Sienna stood at the kitchen counter for a long time, not doing anything particular. She was aware that something had shifted, in the same way you become aware of a sound that's been absent returning. Not because it's loud, but because the quality of the silence has changed. She went to her laptop and pulled up Mason Reed's personnel file again. Military service, U.S. Navy, retired. She had left it there, at that line, because she'd told herself the details weren't relevant. But the details were becoming relevant in the way that inconvenient things tended to, slowly, and then all at once. She picked up her phone and called a number she kept in a separate contact group, the number of a private research consultant she'd used twice before for background verification on potential executive hires. "I need a work history on someone," she said when the call connected. "Full service record if you can get access. Name is Mason Reed, former Navy." The consultant asked for the other identifying information she had. She read it from the file. "Timeline?" he asked. "A week," she said. "And I need it to be clean. No one inside the company sees this." She hung up. She looked at the kitchen counter for another moment. Then she went to check on Ava, who was asleep with one hand open on the pillow beside her, and a paper boat, slightly crumpled now, but still holding its shape, sitting on the nightstand. The wood came from Mason. He hadn't planned it. He'd been replacing a damaged section of decorative trim panel in the 38th floor conference room. Light pine. Nothing special, but the offcut was clean-edged and smooth-grained and about the size of his hand, and he'd picked it up and put it in his cart's lower shelf without thinking too much about why. During his lunch break the next day, sitting in the maintenance corridor with a better sandwich, he'd started checking for mustard. He took out the offcut and a small folding knife he carried for utility purposes, and he started cutting. He was not a woodworker. He'd done basic whittling as a teenager, learned from an uncle who had very little patience but very good technique, and he'd done it occasionally during deployments for the same reason he did most things with his hands during difficult periods. Because doing a thing kept the other parts of his brain from running processes. He didn't want running. I was still working on it when Ava appeared at the end of the corridor. She watched him for a moment, then walked over and sat in her floor spot. "What is that?" she said. "Not sure yet," he said. It was true. He'd been cutting toward a shape without committing to what it was. She watched his hands. "Is that a knife?" "Folding knife. I use it for work." "It's sharp?" "That's what makes it useful." She thought about this. "Can I watch?" "You're watching," he said. She settled in more comfortably, pulling her knees up. He kept cutting. The shape under his hands was starting to resolve. Small, four-legged, Something about the proportions of a dog or maybe a bear, he hadn't decided. His uncle would have decided before making the first cut. Mason had never been that disciplined about it. My dad had a garage, Ava said after a while. You mentioned, he said, he had tools, not like a knife, like a jigsaw, and a plane, the kind that makes wood smooth. She watched the knife. He made me a rocking horse when I was 4. It took him 3 weekends, and he cut himself twice, and my mom was mad about the sawdust. Mason kept cutting. Was the rocking horse good? It was really good, she said quietly. It had a name. I named it. I named it Captain. Good horse name. I know. She looked at her hands. Captain's still in my room. I'm too big for it now, but I kept it. He cut a clean line along the shoulder of whatever the shape was becoming. Wood shaving curled away, pale and thin. You should keep it, he said. My mom said I could redecorate if I wanted. What do you want? The question sat in the air for a moment. Ava looked at the floor. Captain to stay, she said. Then Captain stays, he said. Doesn't need to be more complicated than that. She was quiet for a while. The shape in his hands had decided to be a bear. He could see it now, the rounded haunches, the broad chest. A rough bear, nothing detailed, but a bear. Are you good at everything? She asked. He looked up. She was watching him with the evaluating expression she used sometimes, the one that was too old for her face. No, he said. You're good at fixing things, and folding things, and the wood thing. I burn most things I try to cook, he said. I can't parallel park. I'm genuinely bad at parallel parking. My daughter makes fun of me. Something happened in Ava's face. It was quick, there and almost gone before he could fully see it. But it was there. You have a daughter? Lily. She's 9. What's she like? He thought about Lily, the backpack on one shoulder, the running commentary, the 3-step negotiation process she'd developed for getting the non-packet rice, and said, she talks a lot. She thinks very loud. She has opinions about things I'd never have opinions about. Like what? She has a position on whether the spoon or the fork is the more important utensil, he said. She's thought it through. She presented her argument to me over dinner one time. Ava stared at him. What did she decide? Spoon, he said. Her argument was that a fork can't hold liquid. Ava considered this with the seriousness of a judge reviewing testimony. That's actually true, she said. It is, he said. She wasn't wrong. The almost smile came back, and this time it crossed the line into an actual one, small, brief, the kind of smile that didn't stay long because it wasn't quite used to being there yet. But it was real. He could tell the difference. He finished the bear's basic shape before his break ended and set it on the floor between them. It was rough. One ear was slightly larger than the other. The legs were a little too long for the body. It looked like a bear drawn by someone who was working from memory rather than from life, which was exactly what it was. Ava picked it up. She turned it over in both hands, examining it with the serious attention she brought to everything. It's good, she said. She said it the way a person says something is good when they mean it, not to be polite. It's rough, he said. That's okay, she said. Things don't have to be smooth. She put the bear in her sweater pocket, next to where the paper boat usually lived, and stood up. Same time tomorrow? She said. He looked at her. She was looking back with the slightly challenging expression of someone who has surprised themselves by asking something and is now committed to not looking like they care about the answer. I've got the south stairwell inspection tomorrow, he said. Runs long. Probably be here by 8:15. Okay, she said. 8:15 was fine. 8:15 was not a problem. She walked back toward the stairwell, and Mason sat in the maintenance corridor with his folding knife and his sandwich wrapper, and the quiet that was now a different kind of quiet, the kind that has recently had something in it. He did not know about the board meeting. He had no reason to know about it. He was a maintenance contractor on floors 38 through 45, responsible for mechanical upkeep, supply inventory, and minor repair work, and corporate governance was not in his scope. He found out the same way he found out most things about the upper floors, through the ambient information that moved through service corridors and break rooms, filtered through several layers before it reached him. What reached him, 3 days later, was a fragment delivered by a security guard named Paulson who stopped to share a coffee during Mason's afternoon break. There'd been a meeting. Something about the board. Something about Caldwell Biotech's therapeutic subsidiary, the one that provided corporate wellness and child mental health programs, and about a contract renewal that had apparently gotten contentious. Whole thing got heated, Paulson said. Hartwell was in there for 2 hours. Which one's Hartwell? Mason said. CFO, where's the gray suits? Does that look like he smells something bad? Paulson drank his coffee. Word is Caldwell started asking questions about the subsidiary's outcome data, whether their programs were actually producing results. Mason thought about outcome data and what it meant in practical terms. He thought about expensive specialists and sessions and long corridors where a small girl sat alone. Hartwell's in charge of the subsidiary? He asked. Board seat and an equity stake, Paulson said. Has been for years. They've been one of Caldwell Biotech's primary therapeutic service providers. He paused. Well, they were, before she started asking questions. Mason filed this away with the flat, uninflected attention he gave to most things. Noted, relevant, not immediately actionable. Thanks for the coffee, he said. Paulson nodded and went back to his rounds. Mason sat for a moment, finishing his own coffee, looking at the corridor ceiling where the pipe he'd been meaning to check for 3 days ran behind an access panel. Then he stood up and got back to work. He didn't know yet that someone had already started asking questions about him. He didn't know that a board member with an equity stake and a gray suit had noted, with the particular attention of a man who had a lot to lose, that Sienna Caldwell's daughter was now sleeping through the night and eating dinner without being asked twice, and that this change had started occurring around the same time a maintenance worker on the 42nd floor began stopping his cart in the hallway where the girl sat alone. He didn't know that a file had been opened, that certain calls had been made to certain firms that specialized in the kind of research that didn't appear in standard background checks. He was replacing a corroded coupling on a water supply line in the 39th floor men's room, lying on his back under the sink with a wrench and a flashlight, when Ava knocked on the maintenance corridor door that afternoon and pushed it open and stood in the doorway holding a paper boat. A new one, cleaner than the last, the bow fold nearly perfect, and said, with the careful casualness of someone who has thought about how to phrase something, I told my mom about the bear. He slid out from under the sink. Yeah? She wants to know if you want to have lunch, Ava said. Like with us, in the executive suite. She said it's up to you. She said to tell you it's not a big deal, but… Ava paused. She asked me like 3 times what I thought you'd say, so I think it might be a kind of a big deal to her. Mason looked at the girl in the doorway. Thursday? He said. Ava held up the paper boat. Thursday, she said. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, just briefly, the look of a man making a calculation that involves more variables than he'd expected. And then he said, yeah, all right, Thursday's fine. Ava lowered the boat. She was doing the almost smile thing again, the one that crossed its own threshold when she wasn't watching it. She's going to be weird about it, Ava said. She gets weird when she's nervous. Good to know, Mason said. I'm just telling you so you're prepared. I appreciate the intelligence, he said. Ava considered him for another moment, the way she did when she was deciding whether something was real or just something adults said. Then she turned and went back to her hallway. Mason lay back under the sink and got back to the corroded coupling, and above him, in the quiet building, something was already in motion that he hadn't been told about, moving with the patient efficiency of something that had been started by people with resources and a reason to use them. Thursday came the way consequential things often do. Ordinary on the surface, the building going about its Tuesday and Wednesday in between, without any indication that something was about to shift. And then suddenly, it was Thursday morning and Mason was in the service elevator at 7:05, staring at his own reflection in the scratched metal door and thinking that he should have ironed his shirt. He hadn't ironed his shirt. He didn't own an iron. He had a vague memory of owning one during the years when Navy dress uniform inspections made such things non-negotiable, but that iron had disappeared somewhere in the sequence of moves and storage units and the long reorganization of a life that followed leaving the service. And he hadn't replaced it because Lily's school didn't require ironed shirts, and neither did facilities maintenance work. His shirt was clean. That was going to have to be sufficient. The executive suite on the 47th floor was different from the 42nd the way a photograph of a place is different from the place itself. Similar bones, different atmosphere, everything slightly more deliberate. The carpet was thicker, the light was warmer, the air smelled like something other than industrial cleaning fluid, though Mason couldn't have identified what. Sienna Caldwell's assistant, a young man named Theo, who had the energy of someone managing 12 things simultaneously while appearing to manage none of them, met Mason at the elevator and walked him to a conference room that had been set up with lunch rather than a meeting, which was the kind of distinction that only mattered if you were paying attention to it. There was a table. There was food on the table, the catered kind, arranged without being fussy about it. There was Ava, already seated, who looked at Mason when he came in with the expression of someone who has arranged a social situation and is now anxious about whether it was a good idea. And there was Sienna Caldwell. She was standing near the window when he came in, looking at something on her phone, and she looked up with the slightly too fast attentiveness of someone who had been aware of the door and was pretending not to be. She was shorter than he'd expected from the building's ambient mythology about her, and younger looking than 30, or maybe not younger exactly, but the kind of face that wore its age honestly, without the careful maintenance that people in her position often applied to the project of appearing ageless. She looked tired. She looked like someone who had been running at capacity for a long time and had gotten skilled enough at it that the effort was only visible if you knew what to look for. She put her phone away. She crossed the room. "Mason Reed," she said, and extended her hand. Her handshake was direct. "I'm Sienna." "I know," he said. Something in her expression acknowledged that. "Right, of course you do." She gestured toward the table. "Thank you for coming up. I realize I wasn't sure how to make this not weird, so I'm just going to acknowledge that it's a little weird and move past it." "Works for me," he said. Ava, from her seat, said, "I told him you'd be weird." Sienna looked at her daughter with the expression of a parent who has been accurately described by their child and does not enjoy it. "Thank you, Ava." He said he appreciated the intelligence. "He's very polite," Sienna said. She pulled out a chair and sat, and Mason sat across from her, and for a moment the three of them occupied the recalibrated space of people who didn't know quite what they were to each other, but had decided to eat lunch anyway. The food was good. Mason, who had eaten a sandwich in a maintenance corridor for 8 months, was aware of this in a concrete way. The conversation started in the careful register of people working around what they actually wanted to talk about: Ava's paper folding, which she demonstrated with a new boat for her mother's inspection. The building. A water stain on the 39th floor ceiling that Mason had been monitoring for 3 weeks. Small things, useful for establishing that they were capable of talking to each other without incident. Then Sienna set down her fork and looked at him. "I want to ask you something," she said. "And I want you to know before I ask it that I'm not asking because I think there's a problem. I'm asking because I'm trying to understand something." Mason waited. "Ava has been in therapy since 2 months after Daniel died," she said. She said the name without flinching, the way someone says a name they've practiced saying. "Good therapists, the best I could find, which I researched the way I research everything, which is probably its own problem." She glanced at Ava, who was folding, apparently not listening. "None of it moved her, not one session. And then you started your rounds on 42, and 3 weeks later she's sleeping through the night, and she told me about Captain for the first time in over a year." Mason looked at his plate. "Captain is the rocking horse," Ava supplied, not looking up. "I know what Captain is," Sienna said, still looking at Mason. "What I don't know is what you did. And I need to understand it because I've spent 14 months trying to solve this, and you apparently did it by folding paper cranes." It wasn't a hostile question. It was the question of someone genuinely desperate for information, which was in some ways harder to handle than hostility. "I didn't do anything," he said. I mean that specifically," he said. "I didn't have a strategy. I didn't have a method. I just didn't treat her like a problem I was trying to fix." Sienna looked at him. The expression was complicated, not offended, but something between recognition and discomfort, the face of someone hearing a thing that applies to them. "She needed someone who wasn't trying to get something from her," Mason said. "All those sessions, the therapists were trying. I know they were trying, but trying is a thing a kid can feel. It's like pressure. She'd been under pressure for over a year." Sienna was quiet for a moment, then, "So you just didn't try?" "I was doing my job," he said. "She happened to be in the hallway. I said something about her boat. She was right there." He paused. "I understand what she's carrying. I'm not going to pretend I don't. But I didn't sit down with her to fix it. I sat down, or I stayed near, because she looked like she could use someone to be near without an agenda. Sienna looked at him for a moment with the particular look of someone reassessing a calculation they'd already made once. "How do you understand what she's carrying?" she asked. He was quiet for one beat. 2. Across the table, Ava had stopped folding. "My wife died 6 years ago," he said. "Lily was 3. Something shifted in the room. Not dramatically, not the way it shifts in movies, but the small actual shift of a temperature change, a barometric adjustment. Sienna said, "I'm sorry. Cancer. I was overseas when the diagnosis came back. I got back when I could." He said it without self-pity and without performance, the way you say things that have been said enough times to have found their shape. Lily didn't speak much for about 4 months after. She was 3, so a lot of it was developmental, but a lot of it wasn't. "What helped?" Sienna asked. "Time," he said. "And I stopped trying to make her feel better and just stayed in the room with her. I didn't know that's what I was doing at the time. I thought I was failing, but she just needed someone who wasn't going anywhere." Ava was watching him now. He was aware of this without looking at her directly. "Where did you serve?" Sienna asked. He met her eyes. There was something in the question, a delicacy, a sense that she knew this was the edge of a boundary and was asking anyway. "Classified mostly," he said. "I can tell you I was Navy. I can tell you I did rescue operations for about 8 years. After that gets thin." "Why did you leave?" The question sat in the air for a moment. He'd been asked it before in various forms and had various answers prepared for various contexts. The honest answer was the same one, phrased differently depending on who was asking. "I got hurt," he said. "And then I decided that the things I cared about most were not in locations that required security clearance to reach." Sienna nodded slowly. She looked at her daughter, who was looking at Mason, and then she looked back at the window and the harbor below it. "She asked if she could bring you a drawing yesterday," Sienna said. "She draws. She's been drawing since before Daniel, since she was 4. She stopped after he died. 2 weeks ago she started again." Mason didn't say anything. "She drew the maintenance hallway," Sienna said, "and you on your crate with your sandwich. She drew it pretty carefully. She spent about an hour on it." She looked at her plate. "I cried after she went to sleep. I'm telling you that because I think you should know what you did, even if you're going to tell me you didn't do anything." He said, "Tell her the sandwich is better now. I started checking for mustard." Sienna looked at him. Then she laughed, short and real, the surprised kind that didn't have time to be appropriate. Across the table, Ava looked between them with the evaluating expression of a child watching 2 adults behave unexpectedly. "You're both weird," she said. "That he didn't see the car in the parking structure on Friday morning. He wouldn't have thought anything of it if he had. It was a gray sedan, which was most cars, and the parking structure was shared between the building's tenants and a pay-by-hour lot that served the adjacent block. He didn't see the man with the phone camera on the corner of Harbor and 5th on Monday, angled at the building entrance, which again was not the kind of thing that registered as notable. What he noticed, on Tuesday of the following week, was Paulson. The security guard intercepted him in the first-floor lobby at 7:03 with the stiff movement of a man who had been told to do something he didn't enjoy and had decided the best approach was to do it quickly. "I need you to come with me," Paulson said. Mason looked at him. "Where?" "Building security office." He paused. "I'm sorry, Reed, I got the instruction this morning." The building security office was a room on the second floor that Mason had been in twice for routine contractor check-ins. Today it contained Paulson, a man from the management company's HR department whose name Mason didn't know, and a woman in a dark blazer who introduced herself as from a firm called Meridian Consulting without specifying what Meridian Consulting did. On the table in front of them was a printed document, face down. "Mr. Reed," the HR man said, "we've received some information through a third-party review process regarding your employment here. Given the sensitive nature of the Caldwell family's presence in the building, we're required to review all contractor personnel who have had direct contact with—" "What information?" Mason said. The man from HR looked at the woman from Meridian, who turned the document face up and slid it across the table. It was a printed summary, the kind assembled from fragments. Mason recognized the format, of what appeared to be portions of a military service record. His military service record, or something that was shaped like it, constructed from actual data arranged in a way that implied things the actual data did not, in the same way that a shadow can look like a shape it doesn't belong to. The fragments were real. He could see pieces of authentic documentation, unit designations, mission classification codes, assessment language. What they said, in the arrangement on this page, was that he had been involved in incidents of escalating force, that psychological evaluations during his final period of service had flagged concerns about regulation under stress, that his departure from the Navy had been, the document used the phrase administratively expedited, which was a genuine phrase that meant something specific and did not mean what the document implied it meant. He read it twice. He set it down. "Where did this come from?" he said. "We're not able to disclose the source," the woman from Meridian said. "This is fabricated," he said. "Not with heat. Flatly, the way you say something that is simply true." "Not completely. Some of these documents are real, but the context is wrong. This characterization is wrong." "Mr. Reed, the administrative expediting was a medical separation," he said. "I was injured during a classified operation and separated with full honors. I can get you a letter from the Navy Personnel Command that says exactly that, if you want to wait the 2 weeks it takes to process." He looked at the HR man. "Is this a termination?" The man looked uncomfortable. "We're suspending your building access pending review. This is standard procedure when—" "It's not standard procedure," Mason said. "I've done contractor work in 14 buildings in this city over 3 years. I know what standard procedure looks like." He pushed the document back across the table. "Someone put this together and submitted it to you. I'd like to know who." Nobody answered that question. Mason stood. He was not shaking. He was angry in the cold, contained way he'd learned during years when anger had to be held. Somewhere it didn't cost anything, and that containment was the only thing in the room that was actually under control. "I'll get the letter from Navy Personnel Command," he said. "I'll also talk to a lawyer because this document is defamatory, and whoever assembled it had a reason to do it." He looked at the woman from Meridian. "You can keep the copy. I don't need it." He picked up his cart keys from the table, where he'd set them coming in, and walked out. Paulson caught up with him in the corridor. He looked miserable. "Reed, It's not your fault," Mason said. "You did what you were told. I'd have done the same." "I don't know what that thing was," Paulson said. "But I've worked with you for 8 months, and it doesn't read right." "It's not right," Mason said. "Someone made it not right on purpose." He stopped at the stairwell door. "Do me a favor. Don't tell anyone where the information came from yet. Not until I know the shape of it." Paulson nodded. Mason went down to the parking structure, put his cart in the contractor storage bay, and sat in his truck for 6 minutes doing the kind of breathing he'd learned when he was 24, and a combat diving instructor had explained that panic was not something you eliminated. It was something you worked around, and the first step was always to slow the body down before you asked it to do anything useful. Then he drove to Lily's school, sat in the parking lot, and called the main office to let them know he'd be picking up early today, and thought about who in Caldwell Industries had both the motivation and the resources to pull classified military fragments and have them assembled into something that looked like a threat assessment. He had a name already. He'd had it since Paulson's coffee break comment 3 weeks ago. He just hadn't expected it to move this fast. Sienna found out at 10:15. Theo knocked and said that facilities management had called regarding Mason Reed's contractor status, and Sienna looked up from the pharmaceutical brief she wasn't reading and said, "What about it?" Building access had been suspended pending a personnel review, and Theo handed her the one-page summary with the careful movements of a man delivering a thing he wasn't sure was what it appeared to be. She read it in 45 seconds. She read it again in 30. "Who submitted this?" she said. "It came through Meridian Consulting," Theo said. "Meridian was engaged by— Oh, I know who engages Meridian." She set the paper on her desk. Her voice was level. Her voice being level was the thing Theo had learned, over 2 years of working for her, to treat as a serious indicator. "Get me the original contract for Meridian's current engagement, and get me the board subcommittee authorizations for any third-party personnel reviews in the last 60 days. I'll have them in 20 minutes. I need them in 10. He had them in 11. She read the contract. She read the authorization. She looked at the signature on the authorization, which was where she stopped. Martin Hartwell, CFO, board seat, equity stake in Caldwell Biotech's therapeutic subsidiary. The same subsidiary whose outcome data she'd started questioning 6 weeks ago, whose contract renewal had gotten contentious in the board meeting, whose continued profitability depended on programs that apparently could not achieve in 14 months of intensive application. What a maintenance worker with a folding knife and some scrap wood had begun to do in 3 weeks. She understood the shape of it in approximately the time it took her to put the 3 documents side by side on her desk. She picked up her phone. She called the head of legal. "I need you up here," she said. "Now, please. Not in 20 minutes. Now." She hung up. She looked at the document on her desk, the one that called Mason Reed a danger, that implied a decorated rescue specialist was something to be protected against. And she felt something she hadn't felt in a while, hadn't let herself feel because she'd been too busy holding everything together. She was furious. Not the sharp, reactive kind, the slow, deep kind that had been building under the surface of everything else and had finally found a specific place to go. By the time legal arrived, she had also called her personal research consultant, who had finished the background check on Mason Reed and whose full report she had received 6 days ago and had been sitting with, reading and rereading, her understanding of the man in the maintenance hallway deepening each time, and who now confirmed that the document circulating through her building bore no meaningful resemblance to what the actual service record contained. He was a rescue specialist, she said, to legal, to herself, to the window and the harbor below it. 14 years, 53 documented rescues across 3 active theaters. He left on a medical separation with full honors after taking structural shrapnel protecting a civilian extraction team. She looked at the fabricated document. Someone took that record and made it look like a warning. Legal said they'd need the original documents. "Get them," she said. Then her phone buzzed. Theo. "Ms. Caldwell." His voice had a different quality. "It's Ava. Her tutoring session ended 40 minutes ago, and she's not in the suite. We've checked the 42nd floor corridor. She's not there." Sienna stood up so fast her chair rolled back and hit the credenza. "When?" she said. "The tutor thought she stepped out to use the restroom. That was 40 minutes ago." "You waited 40 minutes?" "The tutor thought she'd come back, and then she called the desk, and we've just—" Sienna was already moving. The storm had been in the forecast since morning, the kind of harbor storm that came in off the water with minimal warning and maximum intention, and by 3 in the afternoon it had arrived in full, rain hitting the windows at a horizontal angle and the sky going the dark gray-green of something that meant what it said. Mason was at Lily's school, sitting in the truck in the parking lot with his phone in his hand and a legal consultation scheduled for the following morning, when his phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. "Mr. Reed." A man's voice. Tense. "This is Theo Park. I'm Sienna Caldwell's assistant. She asked me to call you. Ms. Caldwell is asking if you have any idea where Ava might go if she was upset and wanted to hide somewhere." Mason straightened. "What happened?" Theo explained. The session, the bathroom, the 40 minutes. "The police have been called," Theo said. "They're searching the building and the immediate vicinity. But Ms. Caldwell said," she said, "You know Ava. She said if anyone knows where she'd go, it might be you." Mason was already out of the truck, moving toward the school office on autopilot. He needed to arrange Lily's after-school situation before he could go anywhere else. "What's she been drawing lately?" he said. "Drawing?" "Ava draws. What's she been drawing? Do you have access to the art supplies in the suite?" A pause. Movement. Theo said, "I can get to her desk. Go." He waited. Signed Lily into the school's aftercare program in 90 seconds, got back in the truck, engine on. Theo came back. There are drawings in a folder here, buildings, mostly. Water, there's a lighthouse. She's drawn a lighthouse, multiple times, looks like." "Harbor Lighthouse," Mason said. "Or the one at Pelham Point?" I don't know how to tell the difference." "Is there an abandoned structure next to it, in the drawings?" A pause. "Yes, something big, with a deteriorating roof." Pelham Point. Mason knew the area. The old warehouse that had operated as a commercial fish processing facility 40 years ago shuttered when the industry moved south. Now a condemned structure that sat beside the Point Lighthouse and featured in exactly the kind of drawings made by a child who had been taken there by a parent who had a relationship with the water. "I know where she is," he said. Tell Sienna to send emergency crews to the Pelham Point warehouse, South Harbor. Tell them the structure is condemned. The roof is unstable. He was already driving. I'm going now. Mr. Reed, the police are going to take 20 minutes to run the location check and another 15 to route units. I'm 8 minutes from Pelham Point. He turned onto Harbor Street. The rain was hitting his windshield faster than the wipers could manage. Call me if you get anything else. He hung up. The road to Pelham Point ran along the water's edge for the last half mile, and the storm had turned it into something that required attention. Standing water at the curve near the fish market, visibility down to 60 feet, the wind coming off the harbor with enough pressure that his truck moved when a gust hit it broadside. Mason drove at the speed the conditions allowed, which wasn't fast, and thought about an unstable roof in heavy rain and a 7-year-old who had lost one person she loved to a weather event and had gone to the last place she associated with him, because when grief gets acute enough, proximity to the memory is the only thing that makes sense. He'd done the same thing. 3 months after Claire died, he'd driven 4 hours to the cabin where they'd spent their first weekend together, without planning to, without telling anyone, without any clear intention beyond the need to be in a space that still held the shape of what he was missing. Lily had been with his sister. He'd sat in the dark cabin for 2 hours and then driven home. He understood what Ava was doing at Pelham Point. He just needed her to be doing it somewhere the roof wasn't made of corroded steel and deteriorating timber that had been condemned 8 months ago. The warehouse came into view at the end of the Point Road, a long, low structure with a sagging roofline, windows long since gone. The lighthouse standing red-striped about 200 yards further out on the point. In the storm, it looked like a place you'd find in a nightmare, which was not helpful information when a 7-year-old was somewhere inside it. Mason parked, got out, pulled his jacket collar up against the rain that was immediately irrelevant because he was soaked within 8 seconds, and jogged to the warehouse's main entrance. 2 wide doors, one hanging at an angle from a single remaining hinge, the gap between them big enough for a small child to walk through. He went in. The interior was vast and dark, and smelled like salt water and old timber, and the rain on the roof created a continuous noise that was almost but not quite loud enough to cover the sound of the structure's distress. Small pops, the long, low groan of metal under thermal and moisture stress, the intermittent sound of falling water inside where the roof was already leaking. He pulled out his work flashlight. He carried one always, it was a maintenance habit, and swept it across the space. The floor was concrete, cracked in long seams, with standing water in the low points. Old equipment had been left in a cluster near the north wall. The rusted shapes of processing machinery, unidentifiable now, grown into an archipelago of junk and condensation. At the far end of the warehouse, in the corner where the walls met and the roof, for whatever structural reason, appeared to be holding better than elsewhere, there was a shape that was not machinery. Ava was sitting with her back in the corner, knees up, arms around her knees, wearing a light jacket that was wet through. She had a paper boat in one hand. It was completely destroyed by the rain, a wad of pulp, but she was still holding it. She looked at him when the flashlight reached her. She didn't look surprised. She looked the way a person looks when they've been found doing something private and have to decide whether to be angry or relieved. "Hey," he said. He walked toward her at a normal pace. Not running. Running was the wrong energy. "I figured you'd be here. I figured you'd be here." "How?" she said. Her voice was flat with cold and something more than cold. "You draw it a lot," he said. "The lighthouse. This building." He crouched down when he reached her, putting himself at her level. "Your dad brought you here?" She looked at the ruined boat. "We came twice. He liked lighthouses. He was going to take me to all of them." Her voice was doing the thing where it was very steady because the alternative was not. "We only got to do 2. The roof made a sound above them. A long, deep sound, like something shifting that was not supposed to shift. Mason looked up. His flashlight caught a section of the roofline about 60 feet back toward the entrance where the beam structure had developed a visible sag, since the last time he'd tracked its geometry, which was right now, first time, and it was bad. "Ava," he said, "I need you to stand up for me." "I don't want to, I know," he said. "I'm not asking you to leave the lighthouse. I'm not asking you to leave what your dad showed you. You can come back here." He kept his voice level. "But the roof in this building is not going to hold through this storm, and I need you to stand up and we're going to walk out of here, okay? She looked at him. She was 7 years old and she was wet and cold, and she had come here because this was the only place that felt like her father. And someone had just told her that the man she'd started trusting was gone, and she'd had nowhere else. "Did they take you away?" she said. He looked at her. "People in the building," she said. "Someone said you were gone. I heard Theo on the phone." Her voice cracked on the last word, the first crack in the control she'd been holding. "You're always... Everyone goes away. Everyone I'm right here," he said. "I'm standing right in front of you." "But they said..." "I know what they said. It wasn't true." He held out his hand. "I'll tell you about it outside. I'll tell you everything. But I need you to take my hand right now." The roof made the sound again. Worse this time. A cascade, 3 separate pops, a metallic shriek, and then the particular rushing sound of something large and heavy beginning to move. Mason didn't look up. He looked at Ava. She took his hand. He stood, stepped in front of her and moved, not running, controlled and fast, toward the door gap in the outside, his flashlight on the floor ahead of them. Finding the path through the standing water and the cracked concrete seams, Ava's hand in his left hand and his right arm up to manage the hanging door as they reached it. They were 12 feet from the opening when the roof section let go. It came down behind them, not on them, the structure failing back toward its weakest point rather than forward. But the concussive shock of it was a physical thing that hit Mason's back like a wave, and the debris cloud followed them through the door gap and out into the rain, and he covered Ava with his body against the warehouse wall outside, his back to the debris that was still falling somewhere behind the wall until the sound dropped to the secondary noise of settling. Then it was just the rain. He straightened up. He looked at Ava. She was pressed against the warehouse wall, eyes wide, the destroyed paper boat still somehow in her right hand. "Are you hurt?" he said. She shook her head. He looked back at the warehouse. The roof section had taken most of the north wall with it. The corner where she'd been sitting 6 minutes ago, was gone. He looked at Ava again. She was looking at the warehouse. "Okay," she said, very quietly. Just the one word. In the distance, through the sound of the rain, he could hear sirens. He sat down on the ground beside the warehouse wall, in the rain, because his legs had made a decision his brain hadn't quite authorized yet. Ava sat down next to him. They sat in the rain while the sirens got closer, and he noticed she'd moved so that her shoulder was against his arm, and he didn't move away from that, and they stayed that way while the emergency vehicles turned onto the point road, their lights turning the rain into something that looked, in the strange way that exhausted eyes interpret light, almost like it was on fire. The ambulance crew wanted to check Mason for injuries, and he let them do it because arguing with paramedics was a waste of everyone's time. But the truth was, the debris hadn't touched him. His back was bruised from the concussive pressure of the collapse. He'd feel that tomorrow and the day after. And his knees were going to ache from sitting on wet concrete. But he was otherwise intact in the specific way that people who have operated in genuinely dangerous situations learn to assess. Functional, nothing structural, walk it off. Ava had a minor laceration on her left palm from the door gap's jagged edge as they went through. 3 stitches at the Harbor District Emergency Clinic. She sat through the stitches without crying, watching the doctor's hands with the focused attention she brought to everything, and when it was done, she looked at the neat row of sutures and said, "It looks like a little fence." And the doctor laughed with the surprised quality of someone whose patients didn't usually make observations during wound closure. Sienna arrived at the clinic 11 minutes after the ambulance. Mason knew it was 11 minutes because he'd been watching the door, and he knew the distance from Caldwell Tower to the Harbor Clinic. And the math of her arrival time told him she'd left the building before Theo finished the call, telling her where they were. She came through the clinic door soaking wet. She'd come through the rain without stopping for anything between herself and the door. And she went straight to Ava and held her for a long time without saying anything. Ava let her. That was new, Mason noted. The Ava he'd first seen in the 42nd floor corridor had tolerated physical contact with the stiff resignation of someone enduring something. This Ava held on. Eventually, Sienna straightened up and looked at her daughter's bandaged hand. Then she looked at Mason. He was sitting in a plastic chair near the window, still damp, jacket draped over his knees. He looked back at her. She crossed the room, sat down in the chair next to his, and didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "Are you hurt?" "No." The paramedic report said possible back trauma. It said possible. It's not. She looked at her hands, which were folded in her lap and not entirely steady. The security footage from the Point Road camera picked up your truck arriving before the emergency vehicles by 7 minutes. 8, he said. I had a faster route. You went in alone. There wasn't time to wait. I know. She paused. I know, She stopped, recalibrated. Thank you. I need to say that first, and I need you to actually hear it, not just nod and move on. He looked at her. I hear it. She would have been in that corner when the roof came down. I know. So, she exhaled. It was the exhale of someone letting down a weight they'd been holding since a phone call 40 minutes ago. Thank you. Across the room, Ava was showing the doctor her paper boat, what remained of it, which was essentially a matted clump of wet pulp, with the solemnity of someone presenting evidence in a case. The doctor was handling it with appropriate gravity. There's something I need to tell you, Sienna said, about why she ran. I know why she ran, he said. She heard I'd been removed from the building and she thought I was gone. She said so, at the warehouse. Sienna was quiet for a moment. The personnel review was not something I authorized, the document used to initiate it. She stopped, chose her words. It was assembled by a third party engaged by a board member without my knowledge or approval. The characterizations in it were fabricated. I need you to know that I reviewed your complete service record 6 days ago, and what that document said bore no resemblance to what I read. Mason looked at her. I should have called you when I got the full report, she said. I was processing it, and I was trying to figure out how to handle the board situation, and I waited a week, and in that week someone moved faster than I did. She didn't look away. That's on me. I'm sorry. He'd been managing, since the parking structure, a controlled anger that had nowhere useful to go. Hearing her say it directly, not explaining it away, not burying it in corporate language, took some of the pressure off the containment. What did the full record say? He said. She met his eyes. 14 years of service, multiple theaters, 53 documented rescues, the number I had for my consultant's preliminary read, and I later confirmed the full list. She said it steadily, but with something underneath it, something that was trying to process a gap between the man she'd read about and the man who'd been checking supply closets outside her daughter's corridor for 3 weeks. You were recommended for the Navy Cross after a 2019 extraction in a classified location. You did decline the commendation in favor of an accommodation for your team. He didn't say anything. Why? She said. They were there too, he said. I wasn't the only one who made it work. She looked at him for a moment with the expression she'd had at the Thursday lunch, the recalibration, the adjustment of an already revised estimate. The document Hartwell submitted, she said, implied you were separated under administrative pressure due to psychological instability. My separation was medical, he said. Structural shrapnel from a building collapse during a civilian extraction. 3 surgeries over 8 months. After the 3rd one, I decided the body was telling me something, and I listened. You've been in a building collapse before. He looked at the window, at the rain that was still coming down outside. Yes. And you went into that warehouse anyway. Ava was in there. She said nothing for a moment. Then, Hartwell is going to be removed from the board. That process started this afternoon, before I knew about Ava, before the warehouse. Legal is already building the case on the fabricated document, and the conflict of interest with the therapeutic subsidiary goes back further than I realized. There's financial manipulation going back at least 3 years, steering contracts to the subsidiary in ways that bypass normal procurement, inflating outcome data to secure renewals. She paused. The therapy programs weren't just failing because they were a poor fit for Ava. Some of the outcome reporting was actively falsified. Families were paying for services that had documented failure rates the company was concealing. Mason absorbed this. How many families? We're still counting. More than 40 that we've identified so far in the corporate wellness programs. And the child grief program specifically, she stopped. There were 11 children over 3 years, all of them showing minimal or negative outcomes. The data was altered before it reached board review. 11 children. He sat with that for a moment. 11 kids who had been failing at programs where the failure had been recorded accurately at the clinical level and then changed before it reached anyone who could do anything about it, because the person in the position to act had a financial reason not to. "What happens to the families?" he said. "I'm going to make it right," she said. "That's not a corporate answer. I mean specifically, restitution, access to actual support, and accountability in public. I'm not going to manage this quietly." He looked at her. She said it with the flat certainty of someone who had made a decision and was not interested in revisiting it, and he believed her in the specific way you believe a person who is not performing conviction but demonstrating it. "Okay," he said. From across the room, Ava said, "Mom, can we get food? Hospital smells bad." Sienna looked at her daughter. The shift in her face, from the conversation she'd been having to the fact of Ava, present and asking for food, stitched and upright and complaining about hospital smells, was the shift of someone moving from one kind of crisis to its aftermath. "Yes," she said. "We can get food." "Not mustard," Ava said. She looked at Mason. "Right?" "Correct," he said. "Always check." The security footage from the Point Road camera ran on a local news segment 3 days later. Mason didn't watch it in real time. He found out from Lily, who came home from school in a state of high excitement because someone in her class had seen a clip online and recognized the truck, which recognition had produced a social situation at Franklin Elementary that Lily described in detail over dinner with the narrative investment she brought to geopolitical crises. "They said you went into a building that was falling apart," Lily said. "It wasn't falling while I went in," Mason said. "It fell after." "That's basically the same thing. It's actually a meaningful distinction." "Dad." She put down her fork. "Someone said you were a secret Navy hero, and I told them that was probably not right, but now I don't know. Was that not right?" He looked at his daughter across the table, 9 years old, her mother's eyes, her own opinions about utensil hierarchy, and thought about how to answer that in a way that was true and also not going to launch a social media event at Franklin Elementary. "I was in the Navy for a long time," he said. "I did a job. The job was sometimes difficult. I'm not a secret and I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who knew how to do a specific thing and did it when it was needed." Lily considered this with the seriousness of a person weighing testimony. "That's what heroes say," she said. "Heroes say a lot of things. You saved a little girl from a collapsing building." "I walked out of a building with her, yes." "In a storm." "The storm was incidental." Lily picked up her fork again. She ate 2 bites. Then she said, "Can I meet her?" He looked at his plate. He'd been thinking about this himself. In the formless way he thought about things that weren't quite ready to be decided yet. Lily and Ava were 2 years apart. Lily was the kind of person who made friends by walking up to people and beginning a conversation. Ava was the kind of person who needed several weeks of parallel occupation before she'd accept someone in her space. "Maybe," he said. "Give it a little time." Lily accepted this. She moved on to a description of the utensil debate's latest development. Apparently a classmate had entered a new argument on behalf of the knife. And Mason ate his dinner and listened, and outside, the harbor city went on doing what harbor cities did, indifferent to the small specific weight of the things that had happened at its edge. The news segment ran longer than Mason expected. Someone at the station had done actual reporting, dug into the Caldwell Industries connection, identified the warehouse's condemned status, interviewed a Harbor District City Council member about structural safety reviews. What ran on screen was 40 seconds of grainy Point Road camera footage showing his truck arriving, and then 6 seconds of closer footage from a Port Authority camera he hadn't known was there, showing him and Ava coming through the warehouse door gap, with the roof coming down behind them. Those 6 seconds were the ones that traveled. He didn't watch them until Sienna sent him the link 2 days later with a message that said simply, "This is going everywhere. Wanted you to see it before someone else sends it. Call me if you need anything." He watched it once. He looked at the 6 seconds of himself covering a small girl with his body against a wall while debris moved behind them in the rain, and then he closed the laptop and went to check on the corroded pipe coupling in the 39th floor men's room that he still hadn't finished replacing, because it was the kind of task that had a clear completion condition, and right now that was what he needed, except he no longer had building access. He sat at his kitchen table instead and thought about that, and about the legal consultation scheduled for the following morning, and about Hartwell and the families and the fabricated document, and he was in the middle of that thinking when his phone rang. It was Sienna. "I know I said call me if you need anything," she said. "I'm calling you because I need something." "Okay. I'm in a meeting with my legal team and they're talking about the Hartwell situation, and at some point I stopped hearing what they were saying and I realized I needed to hear a voice that wasn't trying to manage the narrative, as they keep saying." A pause. "You don't manage narratives, do you?" "No." "Good." Another pause. "How's your back?" "Fine." "You said fine at the clinic, too." "It was fine then, too." "Mason." She said his name the way people say a name when they want to stop a deflection without turning it into a confrontation. "How is your back?" "Sore," he said. "I'll take ibuprofen tonight." "That's not as satisfying as fine, but it's more believable." He heard something shift on her end. She'd moved, changed position. "I'm going to reinstate your building access. Formally, with a written apology from the management company because I need them on record. But I wanted to tell you that separately, not as a document." "All right." "You can say no," she said. "You don't have to come back. After everything that happened, I'll come back," he said. The pause on her end was a different kind of pause. "Okay," she said. He looked at the kitchen table, at the ring left by his coffee mug, at the place where Lily had been sitting across from him an hour ago. "How's Ava?" he said. "Sleeping," Sienna said. "She asked about Lily tonight, whether she likes paper folding." He was quiet for a moment. "Lily has opinions about most things. Paper folding could go either way." "Ava's been drawing again. She drew the Point Lighthouse this morning, but differently. The warehouse isn't in the drawing anymore. It's just the lighthouse, and there are two figures walking toward it." She paused. "I think one of them is you." He didn't say anything. "I'm not going to make a whole thing of that," she said. "I'm just telling you." "I know." "She told me tonight the captain should stay in her room." A beat. "I know you said that to her weeks ago." She said it like she'd decided it herself. "She did decide it herself," he said. "I just said it out loud first." Sienna was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, something in her voice had changed. The professional register had come off, or rather had stopped being the thing holding the sentence together. "When does it stop feeling like you're doing everything wrong?" she said. "The grief, the parenting in it. When does it stop feeling like every decision is like you're navigating somewhere without a map and someone keeps moving the ground?" He thought about the plastic chair in the hospital waiting room. He thought about the drive home the following morning, Lily sleeping in her car seat, the particular quality of a sunrise you can't feel anything about, because feeling anything is too much. "It doesn't exactly stop," he said. "It changes. You get better at carrying it. You find out what it weighs." He paused. "And then someone helps you carry it for a minute, and you realize you've been holding it alone so long you forgot you could put it down." The quiet on the line was not uncomfortable. "She found the right person to help her carry it," Sienna said. "Ava did." "She found someone available," he said. "The right people are usually the ones who showed up." A long pause, then quietly, "Theo is signaling me that the legal meeting has reconvened." "Go," he said. "I'll send the building access confirmation in the morning." "I know." He heard her exhale. A small sound, the kind a person makes when they're about to go back into something that requires a lot of them. "Good night, Mason." "Good night," he said. He sat at the kitchen table after the call ended with his coffee ring and the ibuprofen he'd been meaning to take, and the quiet of an apartment where Lily was asleep and the night was ordinary and the 39th floor pipe coupling was still waiting for him. And he thought about the way a person's voice sounds when they've stopped performing and are just talking, and how you don't notice the difference until it happens, and then you can't unnotice it. Martin Hartwell was removed from the Caldwell Industries Board of Directors 14 days after the storm. The formal announcement was corporate in its language and precise in its content: conflict of interest, breach of fiduciary duty, initiation of a third-party personnel review without board authorization. What the announcement did not say, and what the investigative reporting that followed did, was that Hartwell had engaged Meridian Consulting using discretionary funds allocated for board security reviews, had personally selected and contextualized the military record fragments provided to Meridian, and had initiated the process within 72 hours of learning that Sienna Caldwell had begun questioning the therapeutic subsidiary's outcome data. The fraud case took longer to build, which was how fraud cases worked. But the outline of it became visible in pieces over the following weeks. The altered outcome reports, the steering of contracts through a subsidiary nominally at arm's length from Hartwell's board position, but actually structured to pass revenue through two shell entities back to an account Hartwell controlled. 3 years of it. Not catastrophic sums by the scale of a company Caldwell Industries' size, but enough. Enough to constitute deliberate, sustained manipulation, and enough to have kept failing programs operational and profitable, while the children in them got no better, and their families were told the timelines were normal and the methods were sound. Mason read the reporting over several mornings with his coffee, in the same way he'd processed most difficult things in his adult life. Steadily, without either flinching from it or making more of it than it was. He'd been a maintenance worker in Hartwell's building for 8 months without any awareness of Hartwell's existence. Hartwell had had him removed from the building inside of 24 hours of deciding he was a problem. The distance between those two things was a lesson in how power worked when it was frightened, and he didn't need to be angry about it to understand it clearly. He was, nevertheless, angry about it, not for himself. For 11 kids and their families, for whom the lesson cost more than a week of suspended building access. He came back to the building on a Monday morning 3 weeks after the storm. His access card worked at the lobby turnstile. Dennis met him at the service elevator, not to intercept him, just standing there with 2 cups of coffee, offering one with the manner of someone who wanted to say something and had decided coffee was the right vehicle for it. "For what it's worth," Dennis said. "It's worth something," Mason said. He took the coffee. They rode the service elevator to the 40th floor together without saying much else, which was the right amount to say. On the 42nd floor corridor, there was no one in the hallway when he arrived at 7:20. He did his supply closet inventory. He replaced a panel in the east corridor that had been flickering for 2 days before the storm and had continued flickering without him. He logged the progress on the relay, still pending, 4th work order submitted, a record he was grimly proud of. At 7:50, the stairwell door opened and Ava came out. She was wearing a red sweater today, her hair in the braid that was already coming undone. She had a folder under one arm. She stopped when she saw him, and the expression on her face was the complex one, the one that was relieved and trying not to show how relieved, angry in a way she couldn't quite direct anywhere, and underneath both of those, something that was simply glad. "You're late," she said. "Supply closet ran long," he said. She walked over and sat down in her spot against the wall, setting the folder across her knees. "I drew something," she said. "I heard." She looked up. "Mom told you." She mentioned. Ava opened the folder. She looked at the drawing for a moment before handing it over, in the manner of someone who has decided to share a thing but wants to look at it one more time first. He took it. It was the Pelham Point Lighthouse, drawn in pencil and colored in crayon with the careful attention she brought to everything. She'd gotten the red stripes right. The water was dark. She'd layered blue and gray until the effect was something close to the actual harbor on a heavy day. 2 figures walked along the point road toward the lighthouse. Small, roughly drawn, but clearly 2 people, one taller and one smaller. In the foreground, she'd drawn a third thing. It took him a moment to identify it, a paper boat floating on the water, perfect hull, tight bow fold. He looked at it for a moment. "It's good," he said. "I know," she said. He handed it back. She looked at it, then put it back in the folder. "I want to go back," she said, "to the lighthouse. Not the warehouse, just the lighthouse." "Yeah," he said, "that's worth doing." "When?" He thought about the pipe coupling on 39. He thought about the 4th relay work order. He thought about a 9-year-old who had opinions about spoons and a 7-year-old who had opinions about paper boats, and about the particular arithmetic of deciding what required you and what could wait. "Weekend," he said. "I'll ask your mom." Ava nodded. This was satisfactory. She took her paper from the folder, a fresh sheet, and started working on a fold. He went back to his morning round. The building breathed around them. The elevator on 42 clunked and wheezed. The water stain on the ceiling outside conference room D had dried, which meant the leak above had sealed itself or migrated somewhere new, and he added a note to go check the floor above. At 8:15, without looking up from her fold, Ava said, "I told my mom you check for mustard now." "What did she say?" "She said that was very professional of you." He looked at her. I told her professional wasn't the right word, Ava said. I told her smart was better. She held up what she was working on. A crane, cleaner than his, the neck fold nearly perfect. She said both can be true. He looked at the crane. Your neck fold is better than mine. I know, she said. I practiced. He turned back to his work order log. Outside, the harbor was gray and flat, and the morning light was doing the complicated thing it did with the water, breaking it up, making it look like something other than what it was. He'd watched it from the service elevator window for 8 months without paying much attention to it. He paid attention to it now, Shub. Sienna stood in the 47th floor conference room at 10 in the morning, looking at a document that was not a board report or a pharmaceutical brief or a legal summary. It was a proposal, written over 3 evenings at her kitchen table after Ava was asleep, and it was the first thing she'd written at that table in 14 months that felt like it was coming from somewhere that wasn't damage control. The Harbor Hope Foundation. She'd written it as an outline first, then as a concept document, then as the beginning of an actual plan, funding structure, operational model, staffing approach, outcomes framework. The outcomes framework was the part that had taken longest, because she'd spent 14 months immersed in outcomes frameworks that hadn't told the truth, and she'd needed to think carefully about what honest measurement of something as non-linear as grief recovery actually required. She'd talked to Mason about it during one of the phone calls that had become, over 3 weeks, a thing that happened in the evenings after the building closed, and Lily was asleep, and Ava was asleep, and the night had the particular quiet of 2 people existing in separate spaces who were thinking about some of the same things. What worked, she'd asked him, when Lily was 3? What actually worked? He'd thought about it for a moment. Being there, he said, not solving it, just being physically in the room. I made dinner and she sat on the kitchen floor while I made it, and I talked about what I was doing. Not to entertain her, just because silence was harder. And after a few weeks, she started saying things back. That's it? That's a lot of it, he said. And time. Time is the part nobody wants to hear about, because it's not a program or a method, it's just endurance. So what do you do with the time? You give people something to put their hands on, he said. Something real. Not symbolic, just something that requires a little attention and gives a little back. She'd written that down. She'd written it in her notes as a design principle. Give people something to put their hands on. The proposal had a staffing section that included a position she hadn't titled yet, something between program director and community navigator, which were both phrases she'd rejected because they were too organizational and not accurate enough. The position she had in mind was for someone who had been through something, who could sit in a room with a family that was in the middle of the worst thing they'd ever experienced and not try to fix it and not be destroyed by it, because they had the particular steadiness of a person who had carried their own weight for a long time and knew how it was done. She knew who she wanted in that position. She hadn't asked him yet. She looked at the proposal for another minute. Then she picked up her phone and sent a message. Are you free for lunch? Not the formal kind. I want to talk to you about something. Ava's idea, technically, but I think she's right. She put the phone down and went back to the board brief she was supposed to have read an hour ago. 3 floors below, on 44, where Mason had transferred his afternoon rounds while 42's flooring inspection was in progress, his phone buzzed on the side shelf of his cart. He read the message. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, the particular look of someone doing arithmetic that involves more variables than he'd expected, for the second time in the same month, for the same reason. Then he typed back, "What time?" Her reply came in 40 seconds. "Noon. I'll have them check the sandwich for mustard." He put his phone away and went back to the flooring inspection. Above him, through the building's infrastructure, the pipes and the electrical conduits and the weight-bearing columns and the ordinary steel and concrete of a structure doing its job. The city went on, and the harbor went gray-green in the afternoon light. And in the 47th floor conference room, a woman who had spent 14 months trying to solve grief like a business problem was beginning to understand, finally, and at some cost, what the problem had actually been. The lunch was not formal, as promised. Sienna had cleared the small corner table in her office. Not the conference room, the actual office, which Mason had not been in before, moving a stack of briefs and a laptop bag to the credenza, replacing them with takeout from the Vietnamese place 2 blocks over that Theo apparently had strong opinions about. The office had the quality of a space that was used rather than displayed. books with broken spines on the shelf behind the desk, a whiteboard with 3 weeks of overlapping notes that hadn't been erased, a child's drawing taped at an imprecise angle to the wall beside the window. Mason recognized the drawing. Lighthouse. 2 figures. Paper boat on the water. He sat down across from her and they ate for a few minutes in the comfortable quiet of people who had by now established that they could share silence without it becoming a thing. Then Sienna set down her chopsticks and said, "I want to tell you what I'm building, and I want to be honest with you about why I'm telling you, which is that I'm not just looking for feedback, I'm asking you something." "All right," he said. She talked for 12 minutes. She'd clearly rehearsed it. Not in the polished way of a board presentation, but in the way a person rehearses something they care about deeply and are afraid of getting wrong. The Harbor Hope Foundation, the funding model, the partnership structure with the hospital network, and 3 community organizations she'd already begun preliminary conversations with. The program design, not clinical treatment, but supported presence, a place where families who had lost someone could come and do things with their hands, and be around other people who understood what they were carrying, and be gently accompanied by people who had carried something similar, rather than managed by people who had studied it from the outside. When she finished, she picked up her chopsticks again and ate a bite, and didn't look at him while he sat with it. "The position," he said. "It doesn't have a title yet," she said. "I've been calling it program director in the document, but that's not right. It's too administrative. The actual job is—" She paused. "You'd run the day-to-day. You'd help design the peer companion model, recruiting and training people who've been through loss to sit with families who are in the middle of it. You'd work with the clinical partners to make sure the support programs have structure without becoming what the Hartwell subsidiary was." Another pause. "You'd talk to people, which you're better at than you think you are, in the specific way that matters." "Which way is that?" he said. "You don't perform it," she said. "You don't produce warmth on demand. You're there. And people feel it." She looked at the drawing on the wall. Ava felt it inside of 3 minutes. He looked at his food. "I'm a maintenance worker. You're a Navy rescue specialist who spent 14 years going into situations that everyone else had concluded were unresolvable and finding the people who were still alive in them," she said. "The maintenance work I think it was what you needed after everything. I'm not dismissing it. But it's not what you are." He was quiet for a moment. "The salary is real," she said. "I'm not asking you to volunteer, and it's not dependent on anything between us personally. This is a separate thing. I need you to know that." He looked at her when she said that. She was looking back steadily, with the directness that was her natural mode and that he'd stopped finding startling around week 3. "I know," he said. "I don't want you to say yes because of Ava either," she said, "or because of—" She gestured, a small motion that encompassed the office and the building and whatever the last month had been. "I want you to say yes because you want to do this work." He thought about the 11 children. He thought about Paulson's coffee break, and the board meeting, and the families who had been paying for falsified outcomes. He thought about Ava on the warehouse floor holding a destroyed paper boat, and Lily asking why he ate lunch alone in maintenance corridors, and Claire, and the 3 surgeries, and the plastic chair in the hospital waiting room at 2 in the morning, and every version of sitting in a room with someone who needed you to not leave. "What's the timeline?" he said. "Incorporation is filed. First funding tranche is committed. Personal funds. I'm not waiting on external donors to start. We could be operational in 6 months if we move." She paused. "I've also identified a building, Harbor District. Ground floor, good natural light, near the water." Which was Ava's input, actually. She said it should be near the water. "Of course she did," he said. "She also said it should have a room with a big table for making things." Sienna looked at her food. "I told her that was a good idea. She said she knew." He was quiet for another moment. The city outside the window was doing its Tuesday thing, traffic and harbor light and the ordinary architecture of a life that had rearranged itself into something he hadn't planned. "Yes," he said. Sienna looked up. "I want to do this work," he said. "That's the reason. The rest of it is also true, but that's the reason." She held his eyes for a moment, then she nodded. Not with relief exactly, but with the quality of attention that had been held for a while being set down cleanly. "Good," she said. She picked up her chopsticks. He picked up his. Outside, the harbor was doing the complicated thing with the light. "The sandwich place on 5th has better food," he said. Theo would be devastated to hear that. Theo's not eating it. She looked at him. She was doing the thing she did when something struck her as genuinely funny, the fraction of a second before the expression arrived, when you could see it coming. I'll pass along the feedback diplomatically. That's very professional of you, he said. She laughed. The real kind. The weekend trip to the Pelham Point Lighthouse happened on a Saturday in late October, 5 weeks after the storm. The condemned warehouse had been fully demolished by the city by then. The collapse had accelerated a structural review that had been pending for 2 years, and the point itself looked different without it, cleaner. The lighthouse stood at the end of the road with nothing beside it but the water and the sky, which was the blue-gray of an autumn day doing its best. Mason drove, Sienna sat in the passenger seat. Lily and Ava were in the back, and the social situation of their first meeting, which Mason had privately anticipated with something close to logistical concern, had resolved itself within approximately 7 minutes of introduction in the building lobby through a mechanism he hadn't predicted. Lily had asked Ava if she knew how to fold a jumping frog, and Ava had said no, but she could do a crane, and Lily had said she could do a frog but not a crane, and they had spent the next 4 minutes in a mutual skills assessment that was conducted with the seriousness of a professional evaluation and had resulted in a collaborative arrangement, the terms of which Mason did not fully understand, but which seemed to involve teaching each other in exchange for something about the spoon-fork debate that Lily was apparently willing to present to a new audience. By the time they reached the Harbor District, they were sitting close together in the back seat, working on paper from a notebook Lily had brought for exactly this purpose, with the focused companionship of people who have identified a shared interest and are efficiently developing it. Sienna had watched this in the passenger seat mirror for about 3 minutes, and then looked at Mason with an expression he'd learned to read as something being noted for later, in the way she noted things that were important to her. The lighthouse road was narrow, and the October wind came off the harbor in steady cold intervals, and when they got out of the truck, the girls immediately moved toward the water's edge together, Lily talking and Ava listening and responding in the rhythm they'd established in the back seat. Mason and Sienna stood near the truck and watched them. "She hasn't been back since the storm," Sienna said. "She asked twice, and I kept saying soon." "What changed?" he said. "I stopped being afraid of what it meant for her to want to come back," she said. "I kept thinking, she almost died here. Every time she said she wanted to come, I heard that first. But she wasn't saying she wanted to go back to the thing that was dangerous. She was saying she wanted to go back to her dad." He looked at the water. "He loved lighthouses," Sienna said. "I know I told you that, but specifically, he had this theory that lighthouses were the most honest architecture ever built. He said every other building pretends to be about the people inside it, but a lighthouse is just openly, completely about the light. The whole structure exists to say, here, look here, don't go into the dark." She paused. "I was an aerospace engineer who thought about lighthouses like a poet, that was Daniel." Mason didn't say anything. She wasn't asking him to. "I couldn't talk about him for a long time," she said. "After he died, not because I didn't want to, because every time I started to, I felt like the ground was going to go." She looked at the girls, who had crouched at the water's edge and were doing something with paper. Ava never stopped wanting to talk about him. I kept deflecting. I was protecting her, I told myself. I was really protecting myself. "That's not a moral failure," he said. "That's just what happened." "I know," she said. I've stopped punishing myself for it. Mostly." She exhaled. "Ava told me last week that Daddy would have liked you. She said you both have the same eyes." He looked at her. "The same kind of eyes," she clarified. "She said they're the kind that look like they've seen things and decided not to be mean about it." He stood with that for a moment. "She's pretty accurate," Sienna said. "For 8. She turned 8? Last Thursday. She asked for a craft table and a set of whittling tools for children." She looked at him. "I'm blaming you for the whittling tools." "The craft table was you," he said. "The craft table was absolutely me." Something shifted in her expression. Not sad exactly, but the way a person looks when happiness and loss are in the same place at the same time, which is how they usually arrive. It was the first birthday party where she laughed, since Daniel. She laughed at something Lily said about forks. I didn't even catch the whole thing. "The fork debate has layers," he said. "Apparently." She looked at the girls. She blew out the candles, and she didn't look devastated after. She just looked like a kid who blew out birthday candles. She paused. I cried in the kitchen for about 4 minutes, and then I came back out and ate cake. 4 minutes is appropriate, he said. I thought so. She wrapped her arms against the wind. How do you do that? Cry in the kitchen for 4 minutes and then come back out. Practice, he said. And knowing it's not going to last more than 4 minutes. The first time it lasts a lot longer. She nodded slowly. Across the point, Ava stood up from the water's edge and held something up. A paper boat, which the wind immediately threatened, and which she lowered and cradled in both hands. She turned and showed it to Lily, and Lily said something, and Ava set the boat on the surface of a tidal pool sheltered from the wind by a rock formation, and they both watched it float. It floated. Sienna made a small sound, not quite a word, just the sound of a specific thing arriving. Mason looked at the boat in the tidal pool, holding its shape, the hull staying true. He thought about a girl on a corridor floor with a paper boat that would fall apart on water. He thought about all 17 practice attempts before the one that worked. He thought about the difference between a fold that gives way and a fold that holds, and how you can't always tell which one you have until you put it in the water. He thought about Claire and about the way grief doesn't leave but does change, the way a landscape changes after a long winter, not back to what it was, but into something that has absorbed the cold and grown differently because of it. He'd stopped expecting to be the person he was before. He'd become someone he hadn't planned on being, who was better in some ways and permanently altered in others, and that had taken years to make peace with. And the peace was not complete, but it was real. He thought about Lily, who had grown up alongside his loss, and had become, without either of them intending it, the most fearless person he knew. Not because she didn't know what it meant to lose something, but because she'd watched her father carry his and keep going, and had absorbed from that the information that carrying was possible. He thought about the fact that information passed between people in ways that weren't always visible. That a father eating lunch in a maintenance corridor could teach a 3-year-old something about endurance without either of them knowing a lesson was happening. That a maintenance worker saying 4 words about a paper boat could open a corridor that 14 months of professional care had not found. None of it was a system. None of it was replicable in the clean way that a program could be replicated. That was the part that had been hardest to articulate to Sienna when she was designing the Harbor Hope model. Not because she wasn't intelligent enough to understand it, but because she was intelligent enough to want to structure it, and the thing resisted structure. The peer companions they'd been recruiting over the past 2 months were people who understood this intuitively. A man who had lost his son and now sat with other fathers because he remembered what it felt like when no one sat with him. A woman who had been through her husband's death and relearned slowly how to cook for herself, and who now taught cooking classes at the community center. Not because cooking was therapeutic in any clinical sense, but because putting your hands on something real was where the rest of you could start. You couldn't manufacture the thing that worked. You could only create conditions where it might happen, and then be patient, and then be there. He'd tried to explain this to Sienna one evening on the phone, approximately 3 weeks after she'd offered him the position, and he'd accepted it, when she'd been going back and forth on the outcomes framework for the 4th time. You can measure attendance, he'd said. You can measure whether people came back. You can measure whether they said it helped over time, honestly. But you can't measure the moment something shifts, because it doesn't happen on a schedule, and the person it happens to usually can't tell you exactly when. The donors are going to want metrics, she said. Then give them the honest ones, he said. Attendance, return rate, self-reported well-being at 3 months and 6 months and a year. And tell them that the most important thing that happens in these rooms won't show up in the data until 2 years from now, when someone who sat in one of those rooms sits with someone else and passes on the thing they learned. A long pause, then, that's going in the proposal. You're going to credit me. I'm going to say, as one program advisor noted. That's how it works, he said. It's how everything works, she said. Someone says the true thing and someone else writes it down and the person who wrote it down gets the meeting. Are you complaining about that? A little, she said. Yes. He'd smiled at the kitchen table in the dark. He'd heard her smile too, 3 floors of building and a phone line away, which was a thing you could hear when you'd been paying attention to someone's voice long enough. The Harbor Hope Foundation opened its first center on a Tuesday in early March. The building was ground floor, Harbor District, good natural light. The front room had large windows that looked toward the water. There was a craft table, long, wooden, deliberately sturdy, in the room off the main hall, with shelves of materials along one wall, paper, paint, basic woodworking tools in a locked case, accessible under supervision, yarn, clay, the kind of open-ended inventory that said you can make something here without specifying what. On the craft table's surface, someone had set out a row of small wooden animals, rough carved, uneven, one ear slightly larger than the other on the bear. Ava had arranged them. She'd asked if she could the week before opening, when she and Lily had come with Mason to help set up, and Mason had said yes, and she'd spent 20 minutes getting them in the right order, which order was known only to her, but which she was clearly certain about. The opening wasn't a formal event. Sienna had made that decision early and held to it against some external pressure. No ribbon cutting, no cameras, no speeches. The people who came on the first Tuesday were families, referred through the hospital network, and the community organizations, who had been told there was a place they could come and not be managed. They arrived in the careful way of people who have been disappointed before and are not committing to hope yet. Mason was there when they arrived. He was not at a podium. He was at the craft table, with paper in his hands, doing nothing in particular with it. The first person who sat down near him was a man about 50, large hands, construction worker's posture, who had lost his wife 4 months ago and whose adult daughter had referred him because he'd stopped speaking at any length to anyone and she was frightened. He sat down at the craft table and looked at the paper and the wooden animals and said nothing. Mason didn't say anything either. He folded his paper into the approximate shape of a frog. He set it on the table. The man looked at it. "That's supposed to be a frog," Mason said. "Doesn't look much like a frog," the man said. "It jumps, though." Mason flicked the back edge. The frog jumped 2 inches and landed on its side. "More or less." The man looked at the frog. Then he looked at the paper in front of him. "How do you do that?" he said. Mason showed him. But by June, the center had 47 regular participants and a waiting list. The Peer Companion program had 8 active companions, 3 of them recruited through the hospital network, 2 through community referrals, 2 who had heard about the program and walked in on their own, and 1 who was a former Navy medic named Sue Hoo Mason had called on a Tuesday evening without entirely planning to, saying, "I'm doing something, I think you should be part of it," and who had said without asking many questions, "When do you start?" and whose abbreviated origami crane fold was now taught in the craft room every Wednesday afternoon. Hartwell's fraud case had moved to trial. It would take another 6 months to resolve. Sienna had appeared as a witness at the preliminary hearing and had been, by all accounts, precise and implacable, and had required no coaching on what honesty under pressure looked like. The families from the therapeutic subsidiary programs had been contacted individually. Restitution was in progress. It was imperfect restitution. Money and apology couldn't undo 3 years. But it was real, and Sienna was doing it in public, which cost something, and the cost was appropriate. Mason had his office at the foundation, which was a generous word for a room with a desk and a window and a shelf where he kept his work order logs from 8 months at Caldwell Tower, which he'd kept for reasons he hadn't examined closely. The room smelled like the wood shavings from the craft room 2 doors down. He worked reasonable hours and went home to Lily, and occasionally burned dinner in new and creative ways, and was gently mocked for this by a 9-year-old who had developed, somewhere in the past months, the additional opinion that scrambled eggs were more forgiving than omelets, and her father should stop attempting omelets. He agreed. He continued attempting omelets. On a Friday in late June, Sienna came to the foundation after her Caldwell Industries board meeting. The new board, reconstituted, the therapeutic subsidiary dissolved, and its successor program built into the Harbor Hope Partnership instead. And she came in the way she'd started coming in on Friday evenings, without a specific reason, which was its own kind of reason. She stopped in the craft room doorway. Ava and Lily were at the long table, working on something collaborative that appeared to involve paper and watercolor and a level of creative disagreement that was being managed through negotiation. They'd developed, over 6 months of proximity, the particular relationship of 2 people who are genuinely different and have decided this is an asset rather than an obstacle. Lily's forward momentum moderated by Ava's precision, Ava's tendency to overthink disrupted by Lily's commitment to just trying the thing and seeing what happened. Sienna watched them for a moment. Then she came and found Mason in his office. She sat down in the chair across his desk, the visitor chair, which Sue had found at a second-hand store and brought in because Mason hadn't gotten around to it, and looked at the shelf with the work order logs. "You kept those," she said. "They're a record," he said, "of maintenance work orders. Of a relay that took 4 submissions to move," he said. "I find that instructive." She looked at him. "Instructive how?" "That the right fix is usually obvious early. The work is getting someone to authorize it." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Ava told me she wants to be an architect." He looked up. "She said she wants to design buildings that don't have bad roofs," Sienna said. She was specific about the roofs. "That's a sound professional focus," he said. "She also said she wants the buildings to have maintenance corridors with good light." Sienna looked at the window. "Because sometimes people need to eat lunch somewhere quiet." He looked at her. She was looking at the window, and the light from outside was doing the thing it did in the late afternoon, going gold and horizontal, the kind of light that made ordinary rooms look like somewhere a painting might happen. "I want to ask you something," she said, still looking at the window. "And I want to ask it directly because I've been not asking it for about 3 months, and that's long enough." He waited. She looked at him. "When you think about what this is, what's happening between us, the actual thing, not the professional arrangement or the circumstantial connection, what do you think it is?" He looked at her for a moment. She held his eyes with the steadiness she brought to things she was afraid of, but had decided to do anyway. "I think it's real," he said. "I think it started being real before either of us had a category for it. And I think I've been careful about saying so because I didn't want you to feel like the gratitude and the professional thing and the Ava thing were all getting tangled up in it." "They're not tangled," she said. "They're separate." "I know," he said. "I know you know." She looked at him for another moment. So yes," he said. "That's what I think it is." She exhaled, the small exhale, the one he'd learned to identify as a weight being set down. Okay, he said. She looked at the window again. The light had moved slightly, the way it does. "I'm not good at this," she said. "The personal part. I'm good at running things and making decisions and being in rooms where people are looking for someone to tell them what to do. This part, you're doing it," he said. "I asked you a question. And you sat here and waited for the answer," he said. "That's most of it." She looked at him. "That's most of it?" "The rest is showing up," he said, "which you're also doing." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple," he said. "I just know what it is." She held his eyes. Something in her face settled, not into resolution exactly, but into the particular ease of a person who has been carrying a question and has finally set it down somewhere it can be answered. From 2 doors down, they heard Lily's voice raised in the specific register of someone whose creative argument has reached a critical juncture, followed by Ava's voice in the measured, slightly too patient tone of someone who has a position and is committed to it. Sienna looked toward the door. "Is that going to resolve itself?" "Lily will concede on the paper method and redirect the debate to something she can win," he said. "Give it 3 minutes. You've mapped her tactics. I live with her." 2 minutes and 40 seconds later, they heard Lily announce a new theory about the relative merits of watercolor versus gouache, and Ava's voice shifting to the engaged register of someone encountering a genuinely new question. Sienna looked at him. 2:40, he said. "She's getting faster." She shook her head, and then she laughed. The real kind, the one that arrived before she could consider whether it was appropriate. The kind that meant something was actually funny, and she wasn't performing anything at all. He watched her laugh and thought about what it had taken to get here. Not the dramatic parts. The storm, the warehouse, the fabricated document, the board removal. Those were events. What it had taken was the accumulated weight of ordinary things. A supply closet that needed restocking. A paper boat with a bad hull, 17 attempts before the one that floated. A man eating a bad sandwich in a maintenance corridor. A woman standing at her kitchen counter at 2 in the morning with a personnel file and a question. She didn't know how to ask yet. The things that mattered almost never announced themselves as the things that mattered. They happened in hallways. They happened in the specific silence between one person's pain and another person's willingness to sit near it without trying to fix it. They happened in the fold of a crane's neck, in a rough wooden bear with uneven ears, in a paper boat set on a tidal pool by 2 girls who had decided, without planning to become something like sisters. That was the thing Mason had learned in 14 years of going into situations where someone needed to be found and brought back. The rescue was rarely the dramatic part. The dramatic part was the part people saw. The actual work, the thing that meant anything, was what happened in the quiet before and after. The patient attention, the willingness to look at what was actually in front of you instead of what you expected to find. He'd told this to a room full of peer companions 2 months ago in a training session he'd been asked to run and had been uncertain about until he was in it. He told them, the families who come here don't need you to understand everything they're going through. They need you to be willing to be near it. They need you to not leave when it gets heavy. That's almost all of it. One of the companions, a quiet woman named Ruth, who had lost her daughter 3 years ago and who had the particular stillness of someone who has made it through something and carries the knowledge of that in her body, had said afterward, "How did you learn that?" He'd thought about it. He'd thought about a maintenance corridor and a paper crane and a small girl who had stopped talking to the world and started talking to him about boat hulls. "Someone showed me," he said, without meaning to. The autumn afternoon when Mason finally stood outside the newest Harbor Hope Center, the second location, opened in the North Harbor District on a bright October Saturday, was not the climax of anything. That was the thing about real life that stories usually got wrong. The days that felt like endings were usually just days. The sun was doing what October sun did in the harbor city, coming in low and generous, making the water look like something worth looking at. He stood on the sidewalk outside the building with Sienna beside him, Ava and Lily 10 feet ahead of them, already in a conversation that had apparently started in the car and hadn't paused for the minor interruption of arriving somewhere. Children from the inaugural family program were in the small courtyard adjacent to the building. 7 of them, ranging from 5 to 11, running a game whose rules Mason could not determine from observation, but which seemed to involve a lot of movement and periodic disputes resolved through what appeared to be a democratic process. 2 peer companions sat on a bench at the courtyard's edge, available without being intrusive. A woman Mason recognized, one of the families from the hospital referral program, who had been coming to the first center for 4 months, stood near the courtyard gate watching her son, who was one of the children running the incomprehensible game. She noticed Mason and nodded. He nodded back. That was it. That was the interaction. She turned back to watching her son, and he turned back to the afternoon. Sienna said quietly beside him, "That's the part the donors don't see." "What part?" "The nod," she said. "The fact that she knows someone is here and she doesn't have to explain it." He looked at the courtyard. Ava was that woman, Sienna said. For 14 months, she needed someone to be somewhere she was without needing something from her. "So did you," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," she said. "So did I." Ava had turned around and was looking at them from 10 feet ahead with the expression she used when adults were having a slow conversation and she had somewhere to be. "Are you two going to stand there?" she said. "Yes," Mason said. "For how long?" "Little while longer." Ava considered this, assessed the quality of his answer, and turned back to Lily. They resumed their conversation and continued toward the courtyard. Sienna looked at him. "She's not wrong that we're just standing here." "Standing somewhere specific is underrated," he said. She looked at the building, at the courtyard, at the afternoon light, and the children and the woman at the gate watching her son run a game with incomprehensible rules. "It is," she said. She meant it. He stood beside her in the October afternoon and let the moment be what it was. Not a conclusion, not a reward for surviving something, just a place he'd arrived at through a sequence of unremarkable decisions, to stop a cart in a corridor, to say something honest about a paper boat, to sit with a child who needed someone near, that had accumulated into this, a building with good light and a craft table and a shelf of paper animals, a woman whose laugh arrived before she could prepare it, 2 girls negotiating the terms of a lifelong argument, and the harbor doing what harbors did, patient and indifferent and still somehow exactly right. He thought about what he wanted Lily to know about how to live, when she was old enough that it was something you could say rather than just something you tried to show. He thought it was probably this, that the things which matter are rarely announced, that the person who changes your life is often someone pushing a cart through a corridor, that grief doesn't leave but becomes, if you let it, the specific depth in you that makes you capable of sitting with someone else's. That ordinary kindness, repeated without calculation, in hallways and maintenance corridors, and tidal pools where paper boats float, is not a small thing wearing the costume of a small thing. It is, most of the time, the whole thing. He looked at the courtyard where Ava had joined the children's game and was immediately trying to clarify the rules, and Lily had followed and was immediately proposing modifications, and the afternoon was going on in the way afternoons do. Without ceremony, without announcement, the light moving across the water toward wherever light goes when the day is done. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. Not because it was perfect, because it was real and it was his, and he had shown up for it.